Hi, Heart Room friends. We're in Little House in the Big Woods, and we're reading on page 89, and we're reading to find out what happened on Sunday with Grandpa when he was little. Now, Grandpa's home was about halfway down the side of a steep hill. The road went from the top of the hill to the bottom, right past the front door, and in winter it was the best place for sliding downhill that you can possibly imagine. One week, Grandpa and his two brothers, James and George, were making a new sled. They worked at it every minute of their playtime. It was their best sled that they had ever made, and it was so long that the three of them could sit on it one behind the other. They planned to finish it in time to slide downhill Saturday afternoon. For every Saturday afternoon, they had 2 to 3 hours to play. But that week, their father was cutting down trees in the big woods. He was working hard, and he kept the boys working with him. They did all of the morning chores by lantern light and were hard at work in the woods by the time the sun came up. They worked until dark, and then there were chores to do, and after supper they had to go to bed so that they could get up early in the morning. They had no time to work on the sled until Saturday afternoon. Then they worked at it just as fast as they could, but they didn't get it finished till just as the sun went down. Saturday night. After the sun went down, they could not slide downhill, not even once. That would be breaking the Sabbath. So they put the sled in the shed behind the house to wait until Sunday was over. All the 2 long hours in church the next day, while they kept their feet still and their eyes on the preacher, they were thinking about their sled. At home, while they ate dinner, they could not think of anything else. After dinner, their father sat down to read the Bible, and Grandpa and James and George sat as still as mice on the bench with their books, but they were still thinking about the sled. There's their sled. Can you see their sled? The sun shone brightly, and the snow was smooth and glittering on the road. They could see it through the window. It was a perfect day for sliding downhill. They looked at their catechism books and they thought about the new sled, and it seemed that Sunday would never end. After a long time, they heard a snore. They looked at their father and saw that his head had fallen against the back of his chair and he was fast asleep. What do you think those boys are going to do? Then James looked at George, and James got up from the bench and tiptoed out of the room through the back door. What do you think they're going to go do? I think so too. George looked at Grandpa, and George tiptoed after James, and Grandpa looked fearfully at their father, but on tiptoe he followed George and left their father snoring. They took their new sled and went quietly up to the top of the hill. They meant to slide down just once. Then they would put the sled away and slip back up to their bench and back to their books before their father ever woke up. James sat in front on the sled, and then George, and then Grandpa, because he was the littlest. The sled started at first slowly, and then faster and faster. It was running, flying down the steep hill, but the boys dared not shout. They must slide gently past the house without waking their father. There was no sound except the little whir of the runners on the snow and the wind rushing past. Then, just as the sled was swooping towards the house, a big black pig stepped out of the woods. He walked right into the middle of the road and stood there. The sled was going so fast it couldn't be stopped. There was no time to turn it. The sled went right under the hog and picked him up. With a squeal, he sat down on James, and he kept squealing and squealing. Long and loud and shrill, squee, squee! They flashed by the house, the pig sitting in front, and then James and George and Grandpa, and they saw their father standing looking in the doorway. They couldn't stop. They couldn't hide. There was no time to say anything. Down the hill they went, the hog sitting on James, squealing all the way. At the bottom of the hill, finally, they stopped. The hog jumped off James and ran away into the woods, still squealing. The boys walked slowly and solemnly up the hill. They put the sled away. They sneaked into the house and slipped quietly to their places on the bench. Their father was reading his Bible. He looked up at them without saying a word. Then he went on reading, and they studied their catechism. But when the sun went down and the Sabbath day was over, their father gave them a good talking to. So you see, Laura and Mary, Pa said, you may find it hard to be good, but you should be glad that it isn't as hard to be good now as it was when Grandpa was a boy.